All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And Martyn, we're back into our Super League season. Plenty to talk about from round one.
Absolutely loads, yes. Do you think we're going to be here all day?
Oh, mate.
Talking about round one.
We say this every week, isn't it?
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
over the off-season, we had heaps to discuss, and now the season started.
Absolutely, yes.
Doubles and
it
doubles.
It was an eventful weekend, to say the least, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely, mate. And plenty of controversy, a couple of records as well over the weekend that we'll talk about. But how about we jump straight into it, mate? We had the Thursday night matchup. Leigh won, defeating Wigan 0. I never thought I'd have to say that on this podcast or ever talk about a football scoreline in a rugby league match.
I think the last one that I can remember that ended in that score, I think it was 1973, was it? Was it Newtown beat Manly 1-0?
Potentially.
At the Sydney Cricket Ground?
Unfortunately, before my time.
Yeah. You weren't there, were you, at the time? But yes, those were the days. Ken Wilson scored the field goal that won that game, and it was Gareth O'Brien who scored the field goal that won last Thursday night. And it's not the first time Gareth O'Brien has done that sort of thing, because, again, you won't remember it, I don't suppose, but in the golden... in the £1 million game in 2016 at Hull Kingston Rovers, Gareth O'Brien landed the field goal that saved Salford's Super League, status and sent Hull KR down. And that was quite amazing. And he's done it again with Wigan. I mean, Leigh are pretty good at winning in Golden Point time, aren't they? I think back to Wembley in 2023 when it was Lachlan Lamb who did it with a field goal on that occasion. So don't go into Golden Point time against Leigh. Is probably the best advice I can give to any other team.
And when you do have two playmakers, say Lamb and O'Brien, who can knock them over. It sort of poses a bit of a risk for the defensive side. You can line them up on both sides of the ruck, and then the defence doesn't know which one to go for.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I've always said in rugby league, kicking is a key skill. We always like to think that rugby league is a passing game, but actually having a good kicker on your side on the field to win field position is a really important skill. And I'm always surprised that clubs tend to only, by and large, have one playmaker of that type in their side. The more that you've got, the more variation it gives you, and the more it makes it difficult for the defending side to actually defend against a good kicking game. So, my advice would be to have at least two players like O'Brien and Lachlan Lamb in your side, and, why not even more than that? Why not go for three?
Yeah.
Or more,
definitely.
actually.
But, mate, I think last week, you, myself, John, we all sort of thought Leigh would be, thereabouts, but struggling, Maybe
we all said that Leigh would probably drop out of the top six, and I think a lot of people have changed their opinion now. The most remarkable thing about that game, Jake, was that Leigh had probably got about 5 or 6 new players in who weren't with them last year. And every single one of those players played really well, I thought. I was particularly impressed by Ethan O'Neill, who I'd not been aware of.
The son of Julian O'Neill.
The Julian O'Neill's so he's certainly got good DNA in him, hasn't he, Ethan O'Neill? And he actually showed that he's a very good player, and I'm very surprised he's never made an NRL appearance. When you look at how well he played on Thursday night. So, and all the others played well as well, didn't they? All the other new boys for Leigh. So
I think O'Neill had the difficult task of marking Nsemba the whole match. And I'm not saying Nsemba played bad, but there was a lot of one-on-one tackles O'Neill made that shut him down.
No fear at all.
Match.
Yeah, absolutely piled into it. And there were, and it's interesting. I'd speculated beforehand that if you get two really top teams, two teams who play a game and make virtually no errors, either in attack or defence, does that mean you'll end up with a sterile sort of a game? Because, there won't be any clean breaks, there won't be any exciting highlights of the game and so on. And yet, actually, it was great to watch, wasn't it? It really was great to watch. You could feel the tension throughout the game. There were a number of, real incidents in the game. I thought one of the most crucial, and great credit to him, was Kearnan Brand tackling Jay Field when Jay Field appeared to have two players outside him. And if he'd got the ball to them, there was a very good chance they might have scored. But Kearnan Brand came in and without any hesitation nailed Jay Field and stopped him from doing that. And that was a really crucial moment in the game, as was a bit later in the game when Harry Smith kicked the ball over the defence and Bevan French was just sort of running onto it to, over the line to score. And Lachlan Lamb just got his hand up and touched it down and stopped the ball from getting to French. And that was a crucial moment.
It was almost like a basketball block the way he got up and hit it down.
It was amazing. And, great for Leigh. I mean, it's funny, you can't deny, can you, the excitement of Golden Point. It is exciting, even though we had to wait for it. For some strange reason, there was some confusion with the clock. The clock in the stadium made us wait about 7 minutes before the Golden Point time could begin. But you always thought, once it got into Golden Point time, you always thought that Leigh had a great chance of doing it. And of course, they were playing towards their own supporters. And when Gareth O'Brien kicked that goal, that end of the Wigan ground erupted with Leigh fans. And you couldn't help but feel pleased for them, because it's the first time I think they've won in Wigan, is it since 1973? And the first time I think they've beaten Wigan in Super League. So, all credit to Leigh, and it's no surprise that Adrian Lamb was absolutely delighted afterwards, and is still delighted. I was actually sitting in on the Leigh media conference yesterday over Zoom, and Adrian was struggling to stop smiling, really. Clearly, he was obviously very happy. And the only problem for Leigh now, of course, is that they might think they're going to play that well all the time, and in that case, obviously they won't do. No team plays that well all the time. Rugby league's a strange game, but you can't be at 100% forever. So, they're going to face Huddersfield Giants this Sunday, and that will be a dangerous game for them, because Huddersfield won there in the first game of the season last season, which Adrian, made clear that he's got sort of bitter memories of, really. So Leigh will be desperate not to make a hash of that game, having played so well at Wigan. And it'd be interesting to see how many fans they get coming to Leigh on Sunday as well. Yeah,
I think also the signing of Isaac Liu playing through the middle. He was, solid in defence and attack, and David Armstrong. He was
David
quite
Armstrong
safe
looks,
at the back.
Looks a potentially really good player, doesn't he?
And they tested him as well. A lot of kicks into the corners.
Yeah.
I don't think can't remember if he made a mistake. Did he? No. And made a lot of metres as well. Which, very safe. So I think.
Well, he made, if you remember, he made the run downfield immediately prior to Gareth O'Brien dropping that goal. And if he'd not done that, Gareth O'Brien probably would have been too far out to be able to drop the goal successfully. So David Armstrong deserves enormous credit, I think. And everybody said, he's going to be a really fine acquisition, possibly the best overseas acquisition in Super League this year. And he did nothing to contradict that view, did he, on Thursday night? Yeah.
And on the other side of the pitch, I think even Matty Pete, sort of in his post-match interview on the sideline, he was quite impressed with the standard of the match from both sides as well.
It wasn't that Wigan played badly, it was that Leigh played extremely well and, just about deserved to win. But, I mean, as I say, Golden Point's exciting, but I still think, I don't know whether I'm in a minority now, but I still think that a draw is a perfectly legitimate result, 1 point each, when you've played 80 minutes at that level of intensity. I'd still revert to being a draw. Although, having said that, if we're going to retain the golden point, which, obviously we are by the look of it, my advice would be to the rugby league would be to change the point system. How about 3 points for a win, 2 points for a golden point win, and 1 point for a golden point defeat, and no points for an ordinary defeat over 80 minutes? Because I think when you draw at the 80-minute marks, at the 80-minute mark, I think you deserve something for that. And so, you look back at the Wigan game. I would have given, if you get 3 points for winning, Leigh would have had 2 points for winning in golden point, and Wigan 1 point. And then, and the same with OKR and Castleford, in fact, which we probably want to talk about in a moment, don't we?
Yeah. And just another quick one on that match. Liam Moore, I thought he officiated the game perfectly. We hardly noticed him, I felt like. He only stood in when he needed to.
Very few penalties, very few 6 again restarts. In fact, I can't even remember a single 6 again. Can you?
No, not off the top of my head, mate. But I just remember sitting there thinking, I've hardly noticed him this match.
Yeah.
And it sort of was the reason why the game flowed so well and so quickly.
Yeah. One sin bin, I think there was, wasn't there?
Yeah. Well, they saw Adam Kearnan playing the match.
Towards the end of the 80 minutes.
Which I think was justified.
Oh, yeah. I don't think anybody would argue with that. The other thing was that there were 2 captain's challenges in that game, both of which failed. And we ought to talk about the captain's challenge over the whole weekend. Because, as I've written in League Express, it's obviously an innovation. It's come from the NRL. And altogether, there were 10 captain's challenges in the 6 games. 8 of them failed. 8 of them were just rejected, out of hand. And 2 of them, the conclusion was that it was impossible to say whether they should succeed or fail. So they were just, so the team making the challenge didn't lose the right to make another challenge. But nobody, there wasn't a single captain's challenge in all those 10 that was successful. So that's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I actually think that's a great compliment to the referees.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be honest, I really do think. But you sort of wonder, is it worth having it if the referees are just going to be proved right all the time? But it is interesting that nobody succeeded. I mean, obviously, eventually somebody will succeed. But I thought in some games the captain's challenge sort of held up the game unnecessarily and extended it, and I thought that was particularly true in France in the Catalans-Hull game, where the video referee and the people in charge of the cameras didn't quite seem to be on the same wavelength, did they?
Yeah.
Ben Thaler was the video referee, and I got the feeling that the people operating the cameras might not have been able to understand English, because he was saying, give me this angle, and they were giving him a different one. So, that needs ironing out a bit. The Captain's Challenge works well in the NRL because they've got so many cameras that they can pick out immediately whether it should succeed or not. And it just takes 10 seconds or so. Yeah. But it was a much longer process in Super League. And I don't think that was a really great element of it, to be honest.
They almost need to do like a training sort of trial run with a heap of different incidents from prior matches and just saying, quickly rule on this. You've got 20 seconds or so.
Yeah, speed is of the essence, really.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though. It comes down to a communication thing on the officiating side. So, and you're right. There just aren't enough camera angles, I think, to have that smooth process. And also Michael Buffer announcing the match.
Yes.
What did you think of that?
Oh, I mean, let's get ready to rumble. Who can say it like he can? You know, and
certainly made headlines as well.
It certainly did, and we've got a wonderful picture of him in League Express this week with a couple of people who were getting married. Let's just have a look at that. Yeah, it's a great photo, isn't it? Of two people, John Sinnott and Sharon Jukes, who were getting married, and he's congratulating them. And we'll send our congratulations to them as well at the I think it was the what did they call it, the chapel, the last Wigan Chapel or something, I think it was
Wigan
called.
Chapel.
Yeah, I mean, a great idea, great. And it was Sky who brought Michael Buffer over because apparently Sky are very keen on the Las Vegas event, and rightly so. And it's great. It just gave an extra dimension to the event. I'd love to know. I mean, I obviously don't know. I assume that he stayed and watched the game, and I'd love to know what he thought of it. Actually,
Yeah,
you know,
I mean,
obviously he's a great boxing man, and I mean, rugby league is a combat sport in a sense,
right.
isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. He's used to seeing gladiators go toe to toe in the ring.
Yeah,
you know, this is 13 gladiators.
Absolutely.
I guess 26. You know, going toe to toe. So, all right, mate. We've spent a lot of time on that match, but you know, rightly so. We'll go to Friday's matchup. So we had Hull KR 19 defeating Cass 18. Another golden point.
A thriller, actually, and what a massive improvement Castleford showed from a week earlier. You know, they were embarrassed at Bradford. They lost, you know, to a very good championship side, but nonetheless they shouldn't have lost that game. And you know, they went to Hull KR determined to redeem themselves, and they did do. And it was 18-all at full time. And I felt sorry for Tex Hoy, by the way, because the previous week Tex Hoy missed the conversion that would have equalised the game at Bradford, and on Friday night they had a late penalty that if he'd kicked it, they would have won 20 points to 18. And he failed to convert that penalty. You know, and ultimately they lost the game because Mikey Lewis stole the show by, you know, kicking the drop goal at the end. And great to see Mikey Lewis wearing the number 6 shirt, by the way.
It looked good on him.
It did. It certainly did. It suited him. Although he seemed a bit unhappy at the end of the game. I think he felt as though he'd not played as well as he, you know, is capable of doing. But nonetheless, they won the game, and that's the key thing for them, isn't it?
That's it. You've got to do anything that gets a win, you know, be a success in the club's eyes. But I will say, I thought Castleford probably were the better team on the park.
I think so, probably. And they've unearthed a real, genuine superstar, haven't they? In Fletcher Rooney, the kid wearing number 23, which is an iconic number in itself, isn't it? The Michael Johnson number. Michael Jordan.
I think Magic Johnson.
Yes, those two confused. Yeah, but, you know, the way he took that try that he scored and everything else he did on the night, you know, was terrific. And he's given Danny Maguire a real selection poser when Rome Mills returns to action, returns from injury, because one assumes that Rome Mills will go into half-back to partner Dejanassi. But then will he put Tex Hoy back at full-back, or will he keep Fletcher Rooney there? Well, on the basis of Friday night, Fletcher Rooney certainly deserves his place, doesn't he?
Yeah, and not a bad selection headache to have.
Not at all, no.
So, yeah, we'll see what happens there. Warrior Hargraves made his debut, nearly scored a try. He crossed over, but it was sort of called back. But yeah, I think Hull KR, they'll improve ahead of next week.
Oh, well, they had a lot of new players, and the normal thing, when you, at the start of the season, when you've got, you know, half a dozen new players, I can't remember how many they have exactly, but when you've got a number of new players in your side, it normally takes quite a while for everything to settle in and for a side to click. It's ridiculous to think that it will all happen at game one.
Yeah,
it did for Leigh, having said that, but for Hull KR, it wasn't quite so, you know, they weren't quite as smooth, were they? And, you know, they've lost some key players, and obviously, although, you know, Joe Burgess scoring 3 tries, great, you know, great for him. We very nearly made him our player of the week, but we had to, I think, give it to Gareth O'Brien. But Joe Burgess was interviewed after the game on Sky. I think he's great value, actually, being interviewed.
He's a bit of a character,
He's a character. He's really... He's obviously got a sense of humour, and he obviously is very happy to sort of speak out and give his opinions and so on. And he interacts well with the people who are, you know, with Brian Kearney and the other people who are interviewing him. I think he's quite a character. So, you know, great. And it was a great game to watch, that one.
Yeah, and a good crowd as well at that match. So, yeah, hopefully Hull KR can sort of lift it up, I guess, next weekend. Who have they got? They've got Wakefield, so that'll be a good matchup.
Wakefield on Thursday night, yes. And that's going to be a really interesting game, isn't it? We'll talk about the games anyway a bit later.
Then we had Hull FC defeating Catalans.
Well, that was
24-4.
probably the biggest shock result of the weekend, wasn't it? Hull FC 22-4. It wasn't just that they won; it was the extent to which they did win. And I mean, I've said it. I was actually interviewed on Radio Humberside last night, and I was sort of saying there that a few weeks ago, I went over to Hull and had a sit-down one-to-one with John Cartwright, the coach, and I was also able to speak to quite a few of the players. And I just got the feeling then that things were looking up at Hull this year. It's a strange thing, Jake. You can sometimes almost sense something in the air, and it's difficult to put your finger on exactly why, but it feels as though things are, improving, getting better than they were. And that certainly struck me at Hull when I went there. And you could see it on Friday night. They were a transformed team, as far as I was concerned.
It's almost like the body language. You can just tell they've got a bit of a pep in their step. Almost.
They have. Yes, absolutely. And, great to see them. They were 18-0 up at half-time, which was quite incredible, really. You wouldn't have believed that, would you? And although the Catalans scored fairly early in the second half to bring it back to 18-4, you sort of thought to yourself, right, Hull from last year would now collapse. They would now concede quite a lot of points. But they didn't. They, they carried on and they scored another try themselves. And, Cade Cust was the guy who, picked up a loose ball and ran in and made it 22-4, or 24-4 in the end, wasn't it? Not 22-4, 24-4. The thing that impressed me about Hull, well, there's several things that impressed me about Hull, but one of them was the leadership of Aidan Caesar. And they needed somebody like him. He's completely in charge on the field. He's a leader on the field, and that's just what Hull have needed, I think. Somebody who will be really, vocal on the field, who will, get the players doing what he wants them to do on the field. He's obviously got a great relationship with John Cartwright, and that just counts for such a lot, in my opinion. And it is transformative.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward. I'll tell you one of the things I'm looking forward to this year. On Good Friday, I think it'll be on Good Friday, the Hull Derby this year. I'm looking forward to a Hull Derby where we can't predict the result beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let's hope that's what happens.
Because last year's was a blowout, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, there've been blowouts for a while. Yeah, and it's been unfortunate. But again, we'll talk about this weekend's game shortly. But Hull will face a real test when they play Wigan. Yeah,
and then we also had Wakefield defeating Leeds 14-12.
What a great win for Wakefield, returning to Super League. And, they had that incredible 10 minutes where they scored 3 tries in the first half. Yeah. And the first one, scored by Max Jowett, came from a brilliant piece of play by Tom Johnston, who was going into touch, and managed to offload the ball just before he put a foot in touch. And Wakefield kept the ball moving, and Jowett went over for the first try. And that was just sensational, and it seemed to boost Wakefield's confidence, didn't it? They, because they must have, they had quite a big following at Leeds on Saturday, and obviously the fans got behind them, and they, they were just too good for Leeds, really.
Yeah, and it looks like he's just continued his form on from last year's championship season.
Absolutely, and again, Leeds, I think we said, or I said last week that I thought Leeds would finish in the top 4 this year. Yeah. Having seen that game, I'm not quite as sure as I was, I've got to say. Yeah. And we thought, I thought Wakefield might be in the bottom 4. Well, crikey, that's by no means guaranteed. Wakefield look as though they're going to be very competitive. And congratulations to Darryl Powell. What a great result for him.
Yeah, they certainly don't look out of place, do they?
No.
Now, the big match-up on Saturday that caused a lot of controversy, Saints 82 defeating Salford 0.
What a disaster that was. BBC, live on the BBC, so it would have had the biggest TV audience of any game over the weekend, and it had to be that one that was on the BBC. Paul Rowley named his squad. I think he released the names of 17 players on Thursday afternoon at about 4 p.m. And that squad that he named was met with disbelief, really, by many people in rugby league, including me. It was a much weaker squad than the squad they'd played against Midlands Hurricanes, the previous weekend in the Challenge Cup, and nobody could understand why, if they had to still comply with that £1.2 million salary cap limit, nobody could understand why he couldn't pick the same squad that he picked against Midlands Hurricanes. And the fact is that, one reason why it caused so much anger was because there was no explanation of it. If you're going to do something like that and put out a squad that's completely, that just looks as though it's so totally weakened, then you've got to issue, in my view, an explanation of why you've done it. And the thing was that Paul Rowley didn't sort of get the chance to try and explain what he'd done until the pre-match interview on the BBC on Saturday, and he didn't really explain it in a convincing manner. I'm afraid it was, it didn't, what he sort of appeared to be saying didn't really make a great deal of. It wasn't very logical as far as I could tell.
One of his reasons, I guess, more or less, he was saying that he didn't want to have to be introducing the players to each other on the bus ride into.
That seemed
the
very.
stadium,
I mean, the players surely know each other anyway.
To use.
No, I mean, seemed an eccentric, argument, didn't it? Really.
I mean, from the outside looking in, the way I viewed it is, he's thought to himself, well, with a half-strength side, I'm probably not going to beat St Helens, so why would I risk my first-team players
That's probably
to
the
injury?
Logic. That's
so
probably
this is
the
why
logic.
I'm just going to play the reserves, because we've got no risk.
Yeah.
If we're going to lose, whether it be by 80 or by 4 points, it doesn't matter if we don't get the 2 points. So here's the reserves.
Maybe that was his thinking, but, he needs to clarify that, really, if that's the case.
You can't really sell that to the fans either, can you?
No, I mean, there were quite a few Salford fans who did follow them there, and to, give credit to them, they kept supporting the Salford players, but they won't want to do that for many more weeks. And I've been told that hopefully the issue about ownership will be resolved this week, and the RFL will be able to give them the go ahead and raise the salary cap up to normal levels. But there is a question for me. The thing is that this takeover at Salford has been ongoing for a long time, and it was always going to, go right up to the start of the new season. What I can't understand is why the RFL couldn't have sort of said last week, look, we know this game's on TV, we know it's on the BBC, we don't want to let the BBC down with a game that involves a team of much below average standard. So we're going to give Salford an interim. We're going to allow them to play their full strength team on this occasion, but that doesn't mean that we've approved the takeover yet. So if the takeover isn't approved, they'll go back down to 1.2 million. That's what they should have said, surely. And is there a reason why they couldn't have done? Well, again, I've criticised Salford for not putting out a statement explaining their position. I think the RFL should have issued a statement as well, saying exactly why they couldn't have given them permission on an interim basis to play their full-strength side and not damage the reputation of Super League, because it has been, it was damaged, and if I were the BBC, I'd be livid about it. Because it was their first game of the season. It was a game that was coming, during the sort of rest period for the Six Nations, which they broadcast. So there might well have been a lot of people who would have tuned into that game to watch it, who might normally tune into International Rugby Union, and yet they got to see a one-sided farce, really.
Yeah.
That's just not good enough. And the people at the RFL have got to realise that they've got to, when you run a sport, it's not just a case of following the rules as they think that they're supposed to do. They've got to manage the game. They've got to anticipate crises and take steps to avoid them.
That's right.
And that's what they should have done.
Yeah, and even just a broadcast change to do the Leeds v Wakefield game would have been
well. They couldn't
great,
have done that
was
because, of course, that game was kicking off at a different time, wasn't
that's
it?
Right.
Yeah. So it was in the schedule to start at 5:30. So you couldn't do anything about it, really.
Now the RFL on Monday announced that they're going to investigate the whole selection crisis for Salford. Now, my understanding is that team that was submitted to the RFL last week, I believe Rowley, he submitted 2 teams that they rejected, and then the third team list he submitted was the one full of reserves players, which the RFL accepted. Now, if I was to bring you a story for League Express next week, Martyn, and you sent it back to me and said you need to rewrite this, I'm not happy with it, I sent you another one, and then you said, no, rewrite this, Jake, I'm still not happy. I give you a third one, and you give it the tick of approval, and then that article cops a bit of backlash in next week's edition of League Express, and then all of a sudden you announce that you're going to investigate my story.
Yeah, well,
how does that make sense?
If that's correct, I mean, that's just ridiculous, isn't it? And apart from anything else, it's closing the stable door when the horse has bolted, hasn't it? You know, it's happened now. So, and I can't see, as you say, he submitted that team. That team presumably was approved, and it now looks very difficult to sort of say, well, they should be, punished for doing what they did. I mean, it did seem to me that there was some petulance in what Paul Rowley did, but I honestly can't see that there are grounds now for fining them or even deducting points from them. I think that would be totally ridiculous.
Yeah, so it's caused a lot of controversy online, obviously with the 2 scorelines, the 1-0 game and the 82-0 game. You can't help but feel like it's a bit of a mockery.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
well, it's not, I mean, it should have been an absolutely great weekend for rugby league, shouldn't it? And actually, they put out a thing earlier this week, RL Commercial, saying that, the crowd figures, the aggregated crowd figure was very nearly the highest ever in Super League. It just fell short by probably 1,500. And I think it's fair to say that if Salford had put out their strongest side at St Helens, it would have broken that crowd record probably, because I suspect there were probably 1,500 or so people who didn't go to the game because they anticipated exactly what happened.
Even Saints fans as well. I'm
sure
they
absolutely.
probably said, I'll just watch it at home. There's no point going out in the cold and seeing our team put 82 on them. We'll see what happens there. I'm sure more will come out of it, and I'm excited to see what team list Salford name for this weekend.
Oh, crikey, yeah.
And in Sunday's matchup, mate, we had Warrington 20 defeating Giants 12. A pretty good performance from Huddersfield. I was quite pleased to see how well they played on the pitch. Very good
performance, yeah. They're not a bad side, Huddersfield, and they'll be a threat to anybody this year, I think, once they settle in. They're still dogged by injuries. Of all the sides in Super League, I think they've had the most pre-season injuries, and Adam Clune obviously not playing for them yet. And in the circumstances, they were very threatening, and for much of the game, they looked as though they could have beaten Warrington.
Yeah.
And Warrington probably felt quite happy to go away with the points, I would think, on Sunday. It made some interesting selections. Did Sam Burgess, the Warrington coach? He brought Stephen Ratchford back into the side, the veteran, and replacing Oliver Leyland, the kid they've signed from London Broncos. And we had an interesting article in League Express an interview with Danny Walker, the Warrington hooker, praising Oliver Leyland, saying what a, he's just the sort of kid, that they've brought to Warrington, just the sort of player who, will do a really great job for them. But Sam decided, I think, on balance, not to play him against Huddersfield. But I would think, I really liked Oliver Leyland last year when he played for London. I thought he was a real asset for them, and I'm sure he'll be an asset for Warrington. So, I would hope that he'd get quite a lot of chances this year.
Yeah, and it might just be a matter of Sam taking the pressure off him a little bit, going with the experienced hand for the first match of the season. And Warrington slow out of the blocks, much like Hull KR, I think.
Yes.
Didn't play to their potential, but happy to come away with the 2 points, I think. So
absolutely, yeah.
I'm sure we'll see some improvement from both those sides next weekend.
One of the interesting things, that we've talked about attendances, and it was interesting to see Wigan getting 21,748 to see them play Leigh. Now, that's really interesting because, the great thing is that the result of that game almost guarantees that next time they play each other, they'll get, hopefully, a very similar sort of a crowd figure. And I think, we urgently need, in rugby league, one of our problems is that we very rarely have sellout crowds, and those Lancashire clubs, particularly Wigan, Warrington, St Helens and Leigh, in my opinion, those clubs ought to be selling out their home games against each other. So that Wigan come very close to it when they play St Helens, but now it looks as though they're starting to get reasonably close to doing so against Leigh, and they should be doing so against Warrington as well whenever they play them, and vice versa. Whenever those other clubs are playing at home against Wigan, they should be all testing their capacity, shouldn't they? And we just urgently need to get to that point where clubs are selling out matches. Hull KR are selling out their games. 11,020 now that appears to be their capacity. Wakefield, I think, will probably sell out their game against Hull KR this Thursday night. Wakefield, has a more limited capacity, but obviously if they can sell it out, that's going to be great. So we need to get more and more clubs. Leeds ought to be able to sell out some of their bigger games as well. Once you start selling out your stadiums, it becomes much easier to market your game and to promote your matches, and and to generate more income from them as well.
That's it. It's all about, I don't know if this is on the clubs or the league as a whole, but creating storylines between teams. Last time we faced off against this team, this is what happened.
Absolutely, that's what they need to learn how to do.
Vengeance or back for revenge, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Really trying to, I guess, cause a little bit of off-field drama about the on-field stuff.
Absolutely, yes.
It is. There is some promising signs, as you said, with the Lancashire side. So we'll see. Hopefully that'll keep improving.
Yeah. The Yorkshire sides, struggle comparatively. Although, again, Wakefield, Hull KR might, they might be the clubs that do it for Yorkshire this year.
No, definitely. We also had the round 4 of the Challenge Cup draw announced in that 82-0 flogging we saw over the weekend, mate.
Didn't we? Yeah.
That was probably the highlight of the whole broadcast, I guess.
Probably. What
did you make of the draw, mate? Is there any matchups there that catch your eye?
Oh, St Helens versus Leeds is probably the one that the BBC will pick. They'll show that game. I don't think it's going to be on TV, but I think it's going to be online. Okay. The BBC's coverage of the Challenge Cup isn't as extensive as it used to be a few years ago. So that's that looks like the game of the round. But also, Wigan versus Hull looks a great game. Huddersfield versus Wakefield. Those are the 3 games that involve all Super League clubs. And then we've got Widnes versus Warrington, a local derby there on in Cheshire. So and Salford versus Bradford looks interesting, doesn't it? Given that we're not sure what's happening at Salford at the moment. So
if it's last weekend's team that Rowley decides to put on the field,
I'd back Bradford. Yes, in that case. And Hull KR Oldham. Oldham have had a great start to life in the Championship over York. Yes,
that was a bit of a shock, wasn't it?
It was. Yes.
50-4.
It was. The size of the win was the shock, wasn't it? Really quite amazing, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, an interesting draw, and we'll see how it works out.
Well, I think back to that chat we had with Mike Ford on the podcast, and he was very much focusing on the long-term future of the club and getting back to Super League, and it's just sort of blew me away when I read that scoreline. I thought, wow, good on them.
Yeah, great.
All right, mate, what else do we have here? So last week we spoke a little bit about a coup to oust the RFL chair, Simon Johnson. Do we have any update on the story? Well,
it's now going to be at the Rugby League Council meeting on March the 12th. There's a motion for him to stand down immediately. And it's a sort of counter-motion to the RFL's own motion that would see him leave his position in December.
Right.
But it now looks as though they're going to rule him out and then set up a commission. Let me just see if I can read this. And a membership review of the professional game should be implemented with Leigh owner Derek Beaumont and Leeds Chief Executive Gary Hetherington becoming club-nominated representatives, having the power to appoint an implementation committee and a chair, with its findings to be reported to and approved at the Rugby League Council in July 2025. So that's going to be quite dramatic, isn't it, if it happens? And it looks as though the person likely to be appointed will be Nigel Wood, the former RFL chief executive, who's now the chairman of Bradford Bulls. So that's going to be quite dramatic, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I wonder if Bradford will be. He probably won't be able to continue his role with Bradford.
If it's an interim, if he's on a interim basis, maybe he'll need to stand down temporarily from Bradford. Who knows? That's all to be decided, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think. NRL news I saw, was it yesterday or might have been overnight? Cam Murray. He's torn his Achilles for South Sydney Rabbitohs, so it looks like he's going to be missing probably a great chunk of the year, probably the whole season.
Yeah,
which is terrible news. Right on the eve, or not on the eve, but we're a week out or a couple of weeks out from the NRL season.
Yeah.
So devastating news there for Souths.
And we had the All Stars game, didn't we?
Yes,
that's
right.
Maori won a very tight game at Combank Stadium at Parramatta, 10 points to 6. And
it was a tough battle.
Yeah.
I only watched the highlights because I think I was having a bit of a sleep in on that day, so I didn't watch the full match. But yeah, a good game. Kalen Ponga played very well from all reports and the highlights I saw. But Jesse Arthurs, I think he took away player of the match honours, which is quite interesting for an outside back to get it.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yes, and it seemed like there was a decent crowd there as well, and I always love watching that match because of the passion that both sides show.
Well, the war dance before the game by both sides is fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's incredibly atmospheric, and I mean, there's been a lot of talk about moving this game to another part of the season because not every player who qualified was actually playing, but it was still a compelling game, and 21,328 people there at the stadium. That suggests that it's got a very significant audience, and why move it? I mean, I think it works great just where it is, and let's stop. In rugby league, we often start a concept and then ditch it, when it still seems to be quite successful. I mean, the pre-season nines in the NRL was a very good example where they were playing the pre-season nines in Auckland and getting a lot of people to watch, and then they ditch it. That just... It's typical of our sport. We don't persevere with things, do we?
Yeah. That's it. Every year when you do have an event like this, you should be... how can we make this bigger?
Of course.
How can we do better than last year? How can we increase the attendance? Yeah. Not just, all right, this is the concept, we're going to run it back again next year.
I couldn't agree more, yes. And it's so important to do that. And interestingly enough, the Indigenous women, they beat the Maori women 20 points to 18, and again, that's, again, the war dances were very interesting to watch, I thought.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's, and just the amount of passion they have. You hear the crowds, the way they react when they see the war dances take place. And, it's something that I always look forward to before those big clashes. So, yeah, really good to see, and it gets me excited about the prospect of the NRL starting.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Interestingly, Tom Smith, who did the match report for us from the Indigenous game, made an interesting point about the jumpers. He said the Indigenous jumper is predominantly blue and green, representing the land, with yellow and orange highlights symbolising the sun, and it features gathering circles, instruments and native animals, while the Maori jersey embodies Pumamu, the greenstone which is cherished in Maori culture. So that's quite... I didn't realise, that those colours, what their symbolic meaning was. And I think Tom did a great job there in explaining them and, explaining why the two teams wear the colours that they do.
Oh, yeah. And I think the artists do such a great job when designing those jerseys.
Oh, yeah, they look very... Yeah. I mean, you'd think they'd make a fortune selling replicas, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's it. And like a lot of the players as well, they get like Indigenous themed boots as well that they wear.
Yeah,
it's a match and a fixture that they've got to keep and keep investing in because, as
absolutely.
you see there's an appetite for it. All right, mate. How about we talk about this weekend's matchups? Thursday night, we've got Wakefield taking on Hull KR.
What a great game that looks, and I'd be very surprised if that wasn't played in front of a full house at Wakefield. And who's going to win it? I mean, that's really, you'd think on the evidence of the first opening round, it would be a very tightly contested game. My suspicion is that Hull KR will be wanting to make a big improvement from the previous Friday night, and I think they might just edge it. But I wouldn't risk my life on it, put it that way.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, Mikey Lewis looks like he'll be hungry for a breakout game.
I think he will be, yes.
We'll wait and see.
And interesting to see him opposing Jake Truman on the Wakefield side.
I thought he was pretty good for Wakefield over the
So
weekend,
did I. And Jake is a very talented player, and I think there'll be a fascinating battle between those two number sixes.
And then on Friday night, Martyn, we've got Warrington taking on Catalans.
Well, Catalans were the big disappointment of the weekend apart from Salford. And, will they be able to recover to match Warrington on Friday night? I wouldn't think so, but I wouldn't put it past them either. I think the Catalans were all disappointed with the way they played. I'm sure Bernard Gouache will have been the most disappointed, the club owner, who doesn't take defeat all that well normally. And I think they're up against it at Warrington, but they've got they've got enough potential there to recover. But I can't see anything other than Warrington winning by about 10 points this week, to be honest, Jake.
It'd be great to see a packed Halliwell Jones Stadium.
It would, yes.
Because I think like last season we sort of touched on how the crowds seem to be dwindling a little bit at Warrington.
Yeah, they need to all come back a bit, don't they?
Yeah. On Friday,
and of course it'll be the last game before they go to Las Vegas, won't it? So Warrington will want to play well, and it's going to be really interesting to but again, one of the unknown factors here is whether the Warrington players will be trying particularly hard to avoid injury so they don't miss the plane to Las Vegas. And that might give the Catalans Dragons a bit of an advantage, a psychological advantage.
Yeah, I know I wouldn't want to miss that trip as a player, mate.
No.
And I must correct myself, it's the Luke Littler Stadium this weekend,
it
is it? Not the Halliwell Jones?
Yes, it's the Luke Littler Stadium, yeah. And apparently he was at the game, at Huddersfield, according to a report in our paper. So he's a real fan, isn't he?
No, absolutely, mate. True blue. Then we also have Hull FC taking on Wigan on Friday night, which could be a close matchup as well.
Well, if Hull play like they did against Catalans, then they'll have a chance of beating Wigan, won't they? And actually they did beat Wigan last year, if you remember. It was one of the few wins that they had, and it was a hell of a shock. I think it was only by 2 points in the end, but they took a big early lead, and then Wigan fought back but ran out of time. So you can't write Hull off, but again, I think Wigan will be smarting from that opening day defeat, and the thought of Wigan going 0 from 2 after 2 rounds would be pretty unthinkable for them. So I think Wigan will come back from that defeat and will probably win, but not by a massive margin, probably only by about 10 points.
No, definitely. And I think if it's one thing week 1 has taught us, it's that this has the potential to be a very, very tight competitive season.
Oh, there's no doubt about it.
Especially if Salford can get their stuff in order.
Yeah.
And then on Saturday we have Salford taking on Leeds.
Well, we can't say anything about that, can we? Until we know what the Salford team is. Obviously, if the Salford team is the same as last week or even the week before, then they'll get hammered. But if they can put their full strength side out, then they will give Leeds a hell of a game. And I think they'll beat Leeds if they've got a full strength side. Leeds are picking up a few injuries. Mikolaj Oledzki won't be playing, I don't think, in this game. And they've got 1 or 2 other squad players who are picking up knocks that might keep them out as well. So, and Leeds, they're still, their spine doesn't look convincing to me. And it's going to be interesting to see Brodie Croft and Andy Ackers going back to Salford once again, where they, played so well when they were there. And but if Salford have their best side out, I think they'll prevail.
I fear for what the crowd attendance could be at Salford if another reserve grade outfit's
it
put
won't
out.
be so good, will it? But hopefully it won't come to that.
The second matchup on Saturday, we have Cass taking on St Helens.
Well, again, who knows what St Helens are like, because we couldn't really tell from that Salford win, could we? Obviously they scored goodness knows how many tries, but against a normal side, who knows how many they would have scored. Tristan Saylor, having said that, did look very good at standoff, and if he's a very talented player in my view. But again, Castleford will have been inspired by that display at Hull KR, and I think we could have a very tight game. Almost, if we're looking for another golden point game, this could be it, couldn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing with St Helens. Yes, they absolutely blew out that reserve side we saw, but sometimes a match like that can build confidence in terms of how well the attack flows.
Oh, yes.
So we might see a red-hot Saints coming in full of confidence.
And of course, it's the Leigh Briers factor, isn't it? The attacking coaching of Leigh Briers could make a big difference, and we'll probably see that when they play Castleford on Saturday night.
And the thing with Tristan's performance, I know you can't take much out of it, but just his support play. As soon as someone made a break, he was always there in support and pushing up on the outside. So, that's promising signs. Sunday's matchup, we have Leigh taking on Huddersfield.
Well, in the first game last season, Huddersfield travelled to Leigh and beat them. So, Adrian Lamb certainly hasn't forgotten that. And I think he'll be incredibly careful to make sure that doesn't happen again. So I think Leigh will be a bit too strong for Huddersfield, especially with Huddersfield's injury woes at the moment. But, if Huddersfield can deliver another strong performance, I think that would be great for them. And but I think Leigh will probably win by about 12 points or so, I would have thought. There. I think there will be, particularly the way they played last week. I think they'll be too strong. But, they you never know. They could... they could fall away from what they did at Wigan, and but I don't think they will, to be fair.
That's the thing. I think a lot of our comments under last week's episode were saying you might need to rethink some of your placings, yes. And I agree, but that's why we put bold predictions in the title, isn't it? Because, we can't read the future.
The season has to settle down a bit, doesn't it, now?
And I Off of last week's performance, I'd like to say, Leigh are going to be a contending team, but we just don't know whether that roster is going to be able to stay healthy for the duration of the season.
Injuries play such an important part, don't they?
And some of our bold predictions were based around the depth of squads as well.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm touching wood. I'd love to see a healthy Leigh Leopards come the end of the season contending, and I think it's a real credit to Adrian Lamb as a coach for what he's been able to do with that side following all those departures last season. All right, Martyn, anything else you want to touch on before we get out of here today, mate?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground there, and we'll, next week we'll be looking ahead to Las Vegas, won't we, I suppose?
Oh, that's exciting.
That certainly is, yes.
Couldn't tempt you with a last-minute ticket over to Vegas,
you could
mate?
tempt me. Yeah, you could, but then I'm not sure who'd put this newspaper together.
Well, that's right, but I saw Derek Beaumont put something out encouraging any Leigh fans that were going over to Vegas for the event to reach out, and they might put together a little party. So you maybe call Derek and say, is there any room on the jet, mate? Or Yeah, could you?
It will be fantastic, won't it?
Yeah. All right, mate. Well, we'll wrap it up now, and we'll do it again next week, eh?
That's great.
Awesome.
Great to see you, Jake.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks a lot, mate. Bye.
Cheers.